Hi everybody! Today I have Hakeem Brookes with me for a heart-to-heart conversation. He's a traveler, a student. He's also been in the personal development and transformational space since he was a young boy. He's been spending the last couple of years traveling with and serving some of the greatest leaders in the field, and I'm so excited to sit down with him today. So Hakeem, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
You've traveled the world, serving some of the greatest leaders in this space, like Tony Robbins. You've been part of his world, and you've also helped bring some of his events to Australia and across the world. The best way, I think, to get a conversation going is to just check in with the person and just ask, how are you?
I'm doing great. To be honest, I've been using this time to really go deep within myself, to really take some time and reflect and see everything that's happened over the years.
What do you mean by that? What does that look like for you?
There's always little things that come up to me through life, through as I'm doing stuff, and I notice little bits about myself. But a lot of things end up getting swept under the rug. Or you get small hints of stuff, but you ignore them for now because you're really focused on going for the goal. Let me take that time to take all those things that have been sort of swept under the rug and actually go into them and have a look at, okay, what's the different pieces? Like, why am I going for these goals? What is the point of this? I think every moment is a deep moment if you make it a deep moment. Every moment has the opportunity of being something that can really transform you. And every moment does do that to some degree.
Yeah.
It's more just how you view that moment and how you treat that moment more than anything else.
Yeah. What I heard in your answer just then is you being really interested in your why, and you really being interested in the deeper purpose for you doing the things that you're aiming towards. What's the value of that? Why bother connecting with people's, your why, first of all, and for anybody listening, what's the value of that?
You hear all the personal development coaches talk about, you have to have a solid why, have a great purpose, all these sorts of things. For a long time, naturally, the things I was doing, I had a really great purpose associated with them. It was just, my drive was there. Like, I always, as a kid, I built these drives, whether it was basketball, whether it was business, whether it was personal development. There was always a love for learning or what I was doing, or whatever the case. For me, the transition has turned away from the why being about passion and being about stuff that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And because of culture, of the environments and the different industries I've been in, has turned more into, how can I get the most attention? How can I be? It's very significance-based wise. And I also realized that as I went through a period where, and I know a lot of people go through this, where they jump from goal to goal and they don't necessarily sit with one goal. And they're like, oh, I'm just not, I just don't complete things, or I'm just, I'm not a person that follows through. When really, for me, what I realized was, it wasn't that I was searching for a goal that I loved. I was searching more for an identity. I was trying to find this identity of being this great big man that does all these amazing things. I hadn't really sit down and looked at, well, why in depth am I doing this? Like, what is the reasons that and really the reason why was, like, I'm searching for an identity that makes me significant in these circles. Because for a lot of industries, that's what it's about. In business, in sports, it's all about, you have to be the best, like, make the most noise, be the loudest. That's how you become number one in the world.
Yeah.
And I think that really pushed me that way, and it's just been my journey to sort of come back with my why and be like, okay, so why do I want to do this? Because I want to do stuff because of my love for things, not because of, I need to do this to get love and attention, or because of this and because of this.
Yeah. I think that's such an important point, this idea of separating how you think you should be from who you actually are and what your purpose really is in life. So I think that's such an important point for anybody who's a bit caught up in the tune of other people's life or the rhythm of other people's lives, and to find the beauty and find the meaning in coming back to, walking their own path. I want to know a little bit about the context in which you grew up, because the language that you and I are talking about is really heavily used in that space.
Back when I was I think I was like 10 years old, my mum was into, she was a little bit into personal development and stuff like that. So at some point she brought home some tapes from this guy called Christopher Howard.
Yeah.
And my mum has been very smart about everything that she's given me, is that she's given me the opportunity to hop into things, but she's never forced me into something.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest thing, like, if we were to talk about personal development and Tony Robbins and all that, like, one of the biggest things he says is, like, you can't force someone to do something. You can't, like, if I tell you something, you can doubt it. But if you get me to tell you the same thing, that it's, you own it. Like, I think that was the biggest thing that my mum did, that she was like, oh, look, there's some information lying on the shelf. And I just listened to that, and I really got into the love of learning and growing and going for things. Like, I wanted to do big things and big goals, and it was all because of that sort of love of learning. That's where it originated from. That was developed because of this situation. And I started going to property development seminars with my mum. Started reading so many different books. I ended up at a seminar that I was like, Mum, Dad, we have to go get front row tickets, everything, because it was Donald Trump, Robert Kiyosaki, and Tony Robbins. Robert Kiyosaki, Rich Dad Poor Dad. Yeah. So I went to that event, and I just bawled out. I talked to all these people. Yeah. While Donald was signing books, he took me up and, had me beside him the whole time, and he even told me I need to get a prenup when I get married, and I was like... ended up in the paper because of that. I was like reading the paper, and I went to tennis practice the next day, and my coach was like, it says here that Donald Trump told you to get a prenup. I was like, it's a great thing to be known for. That started my journey with personal development. Once I hit Tony's thing, Tony gave us a free set of his tapes, and I think Tony was the one that I associated the most with, just because the way his content is built, it's really goals oriented, and like it's very technique driven. There's a lot of personal development people that are just motivation, while Tony had a lot of strategy in his thing. I attended UPW. The minute I stepped into crewing, the first time I helped at one of his events, it was volunteer crew, and I just made it my mission to go find the people that I thought I could add the most value to, that were the biggest in the thing. Because the bottom line was, as a kid, I wanted to get around Tony. I wanted to learn more from Tony. I wanted to see what that space was like. Yeah. Originally, more from a probably significant standpoint than what I was doing it later on. For me now, it's more like there's so much I've learned from being there. Yeah. Even though I haven't necessarily always been around, like I've seen different things, I've heard different stories, and I've picked bits and pieces up, and that's more what it's about for me now. Yeah. Back then, it was much more about the significance and the being around a celebrity.
You've experienced the his events and his teachings from multiple angles. What was that, proximity or being in that platinum program? What did it teach you? What are some of the insights that you took away during that year of being so close to his work?
I think the biggest thing, the platinum piece, I don't think was the time that I necessarily felt the closest. But what it did give me was that you have to be really focused on your goals regardless. A lot of people get swept up by the idea of it and the energy of it, and let's go party and have fun and learn and you'll be doing great, but you still have to really maintain focus. Because Tony runs so many different events. First time people try to go and do all his events. Yeah. And it really, at some point, it stops adding value and starts taking away, because you're not actually taking the time to apply the content in your everyday life. Yeah. So then you end up living a completely different lifestyle for a year, and then coming back to real life. And for a lot of people, nothing actually changes because they didn't take anything and apply it. Some people, obviously, to some extent, once you go through that amount of repetition, some stuff is innate within you. But the bottom line is, when you go back, you have all these old anchors of seeing your house and seeing this, and you're going to go back into the same patterns of doing things, unless you consciously make the effort to really reapply. Yeah. So I think that for me was the biggest thing, was as much as this sounds really great, if I was to do it again, I would do it and pick my top 3 or 4 events in the year and just do those events. I think that's the biggest thing when it comes to that.
Those events can be so, not intoxicating, but it's so different to, your everyday life. You're right, there can be the romance of being in that environment without actually really asking yourself if you've taken stock and applied some of the things that you're learning. After my first event, there's that temptation to join the big event, where you're doing everything and you're going overseas and you're doing all that stuff. And I actually took a pause to implement, some of the lessons that I got from my very first event, because there's a lot. He provides a tremendous amount of value, and if you really sit with how much he teaches you, there's a lot that you can improve in your life. Yeah. Yeah.
100%.
I don't know if this is the right way to frame it, but even something like personal development can become a bit of an addiction if you're not paying attention to its uses and the benefits and your ability to detach and then engage from that process and that journey.
You have to realise that as much as there's amazing tools in these environments, the environments are also built as money machines, which means they will do their best to turn over the money. Just the bottom line. Like, it has to work some way for these events to be the size they are with the amount of people they are to create that energy in the first place.
Yeah.
So you just have to be aware of not getting caught in that sales money system, and more sticking to your own root of really it's about, the content. Because the other piece that gets pulled, especially for Tony's events, is people get swayed by the energy of it and miss the content completely. They're like, yeah, my life's changed, I feel amazing now. And they haven't actually applied anything, it's just some dude was jumping next to them the whole time, and they're like, oh, this is cool. What's up?
You bring up a really interesting point, which is the power of the crowd. Right?
Yeah.
The power of that again, this idea of this thousands of people pretty much moving at that same vibration and saying the same message, but for a short period of time. So it can be pretty easy to convince yourself that you're on that same wavelength, but when you come back to your life and you don't have the enormous crowd, with that same message, it's a different process. It's a different set of work.
It can actually work in reverse for a lot of people, because the thing is, they come back, and if they have partners, family, or anything, and they don't see the difference that there could be, they come back with all this energy and try to rave into their family, and their family's like, you need to now go to the cycle ward. I don't know what happened to you last week, but bro, not having any of that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of tension that can be built up. Not only that, like, especially for partners, you come back and you're like, with all this energy, and you had all this fun without them, and if you don't include them in it, it then becomes this other world that's stealing you away from them, and if you don't include them in it and make them understand why you're doing it and what it means and all this sort of thing, it really can just, like, it can end up being a lot worse. They finish with, like, life will never be the same again.
Yeah.
And as much as 100% agree everything, like, but at the same time, a lot of people walk away from that demon, like, looking at their past as this demon that they've just jumped out of, and now their new life is this beautiful, amazing thing that they can go conquer the world with. And as much as I want them to get to that place, the minute you start to shove your past and say, oh, that was rubbish, you start to not accept all the beauty that has happened to you already, all the this event was just, it helped you align a couple of things, but if your life hadn't happened before, nothing would have happened. I mean, people really need to just still accept their past and still accept that this is not, oh, now I'm part of this new thing that's revolutionary and my life is different. It's not like that. It's like, this is just another small bit of information like everything else in life has been. It's just delivered in a different way, and now you can move forward with it.
Yeah, here's what you're saying is consistent with some of the spiritual teachings that you and I have talked about in the past, right? Which is not to separate or to elevate one part of your life more than another, to see all things as equal and as all part of nature, as things happening and seasons happening, throughout the course of our lives. There are times where you've spent a lot of time with your family, you've lived abroad, you've been part of those communities, so you've experienced a lot of different teachings and lessons and insights about relationships over the years. I know in your tender age of your early 20s, you've still had a lot of experiences when it comes to friendships and tribes and relationships.
One of the biggest things that I see a lot of people that end up going into, like, fear of relationships of any kind. Yeah. And for me, if there's ever been any pain with any type of relationship for me, like, for me, it's always a growth thing. Yeah. Like, even if a relationship, even with a friend or family, whatever the case, was short or this happened, it happened for me to grow and get better. And I think a lot of people miss that. They see the, like, oh, it's supposed to be all love, sunshines and rainbows, and I should be happy now, and then something hits them and they don't expect it. And relationships, above anything, are the chance to exercise our greatest lessons. You know what I mean? It's really the points of time where people challenge you the most, and you're supposed to come up with all those things that you've been practicing for years, all the lessons that you've taken on. That's when you're really supposed to turn up with them, you know what I mean? And you're not always going to turn up with them, but then when you fail, you misstep or whatever the case, there's another lesson in that as well. So my number one thing is never to be scared of any type of relationship. You can accept your pain and your failings. As I know a lot of people have been through hell on earth to some point. But if you can learn to really accept those things and move forward, not without fear, but with courage, it can help you grow immensely.
two different threads just based on what you said. The first one is, and I'll give you an example. Like, I had a client who came back from an event, and he had learned a couple of different things about masculine and feminine energy. Right. And needless to say, he went back to a partner who did not know this language. and he was very assertive about, wanting to recreate that dynamic in their relationship. Yeah. And he thought he was helping her grow. And I want to just ask how you reconcile those two things, because it's important to grow and have the lessons and have this passion for, bringing that spirit of growth in your relationships as well. How do you sort of navigate, I suppose, what is yours and the role that you play in the growth of another person?
To some extent, play no role in the growth of somebody else.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people, like, that sounds weird because you're like, I help other people, I'm a coach, or I'm this, or, you know what I mean? Like, I help my wife be this, but to some extent, like, you can give, the old thing, like, you can take a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink. Mm-hmm. And I think I've gone through so many phases of different ways of teaching and different ways of being around people and interacting with people, and I think one of the biggest things is lead by example. I think the minute you try to start imposing information as the truth on people is when you lose the battle. Right? The only time that can work is if they've come to you and are actually asking for you, like asking for help directly. When they come to you and they're open and you can feel that they're ready to sort of to learn new things, then you can maybe impart some stuff. But the other thing is also, like, never think your information or what you're going to tell them is the right way. All I'm telling you is I'm giving you, what I learned and what I believe is right, and maybe how that might apply to your life. But again, this is just my thing.
Yeah.
And, like, there's no right and there's no wrong, really. Like, I know there's a lot of conversation about that, and people are like, well, there is sometimes a right. Like, you can't go kill somebody. Like, you sharing something from your perspective might not necessarily fit the way that person looks at the world to be able to get the information you're trying to give them. Now, a lot of people try to, like, shove it down their throat the same way that they got it. And then they end up fighting about the same, like, they're saying the same things but with different languages.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, they're like, oh, but, it's love. And the other guy goes, no, it's passion. But in meaning-wise, it means the same thing for both of them.
It's the same thing.
Yeah,
that's
so,
an interesting point. Yeah. I'm going to refrain from using murder as an example, because I think we can all agree that when it comes to murder, it's a no. But I think you bring up such an important point, which is and I see this a lot in especially our industry, which is the unsolicited advice, or playing the role of a savior, where you think that you can go and with your knowledge you can save and help somebody else
save the world. Yeah.
It's a bit of a fallacy, because like I was telling my client, when you leave that environment, you have to be present with what this person needs moment to moment. Yeah. To lose the ego as much as possible, that it's not about what you know, it's not about what you've learned, but how you can support and be there for them.
100%. Yeah. And I think also in this industry, one of the biggest things that I've noticed, I think I noticed about myself as well, because I've seen a lot of coaches that really, like, it's more about their egos and about helping people. And I think part of that has been that. We've talked about this before.
Yeah.
But I think part of it is also I really give so much value to people that have done amazing things with their lives because of things that they enjoy, and then came back and taught and just spoke the lessons of the truth of themselves. And if there's one thing I realized, like, I learned so much from Tony. The only way to truly understand stuff is living through it. I, like, for years he was talking about why, purpose, why, and then I get to a point, I'm like, do you know what, I actually understand the power of that now. But at the same time, I know I don't truly understand it, because it's still a learning game. Like, there's always going to be more power, there's always going to be another level to that knowledge.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's sort of just, it's being that excited kid that's ready to, go out there and enjoy and learn, and not, wanting too much from things that you can't control.
Yeah. First of all, there's that myth of arrival, right? One day you arrive and you know everything, and you are who you're meant to be. I think that's a myth that's often proposed or sold in the industry, and it is a myth, because I don't think we arrive. I think if there is any kind of arrival, it's probably death. Like this, that's sort of like a definite point. But, in between life and death, it's something that's moving and evolving. And we've talked about this in terms of some of the traps and some of the conventions of this industry, is that sort of dance between the mentor and the student. Being aware, like even if you are a student or if you are a mentor, of the place that you have in each other's lives. You don't need them, 100%. They don't need you. You're not broken. They don't need fixing. It's just, if you can be aware of some of these boundaries, it can actually make the relationship really rich.
100%.
And based on the truth.
You teach them something and then they teach you something. It becomes more of a friendship and a union towards wanting to be better individuals than it becomes about who is the coach and who is the master and the apprentice and, all this sorts of stuff. The best coaches I've met are people that are willing to be a friend. A friend, maybe not necessarily in a way that we all see it as someone that's always there for us, but more someone that is willing to see listen to us and then tell us exactly what they see and not sugarcoat it. Really that straight to the truth piece, which I think is so important for so many relationships. No, I have nothing to hide, you have nothing to hide, let's just be honest.
I've seen you mention a couple of these values that are important to you. So that honesty or being connected to your purpose, your authentic purpose. Being able to appreciate your past. Are there any kind of values that you haven't mentioned that are really important to you as a human being or in the way that you live your life?
Yeah, these have been my two biggest lessons, especially when considering all of the things that I went through with personal development and in life in general. These two things I think should be taught more, which is acceptance and awareness. Really what it's about. Yeah. If you can, developing self-awareness is so important. You really just have to, it's about, with personal development, there's this need to, fix people. And it doesn't work like that. For me, the minute you can be self-aware enough to notice what it is, for what it actually is, without the emotion, without the good and the bad, just as it is, and then be able to accept it for what it is, as, this is just a part of myself that I'm going to work with, If the minute you're able to do those two things, one or two things will happen. It'll either turn into a tool that you can use, or naturally you will deal with it. This whole, we have to fix everything. It's just, it vilifies certain aspects of ourselves and makes other bits heroes when that doesn't actually exist. All that exists is the meaning we sort of are giving it.
You raised a really important point. Oh, sorry, go on.
Yeah, no. I was done.
And the reason I say this is because there's a dominant dialogue in some of the readings and some of the communication that I've seen, which is destroy or conquer your fears. The mind just wants you to suffer. There's a subtext of judgment and resistance to certain parts of who we are.
Yeah.
Right? And what's really interesting is that then you have people who live with that judgment when they are afraid. And, when the mind is trying to remind them of something that may be important. We might not listen to the mind, but to say that, the mind just wants me to suffer. Yeah. And I have to conquer every fear I've got.
Yeah.
It creates a place of resistance inside, which can be really painful.
Yeah, 100%. I think what you said before, you said about, people feel like they need to feel like they've arrived.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people should actually stop for a second. Even myself, this is something I've been pondering recently, is stop and look at it and go, why do I feel like I need to arrive? What is the reason that I have this concept in my head? Is it because I don't feel like I'm enough if I don't arrive and conquer the world? Achieving, conquering the world, arriving, whatever you call it, is not going to give you that feeling, and it's not going to do that. The only thing that's going to do that is the awareness of why do I not believe I'm already enough? Or why do I, again, it goes back to the self-awareness and accepting that piece.
Yeah.
And I think so many people create this very vague idea of what the future is and what success is, and it kills a lot of people. There's a lot of people that are depressed because of it. As much as even people that look like they're having the time of their lives and they're successful and all this sort of stuff, they got to the point that they thought was arrival and still didn't have the feeling, because the whole time they were practicing, feel like crap until I get there. Feel like crap until I get there. So then when you get there, what do you expect? That you've been practicing this whole time and suddenly you're just going to be able to be happy? I don't think so.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that interesting dance because from the outside in, it might look like what we're telling people is to be complacent. I don't need to get anywhere and I'm fine as I am. But what I want to also highlight is that in order to be productive, in order to move further towards your path and the goals that you have, feeling aligned and accepting in here is actually really important. You can't get anything 100%. Done if you're beating yourself up in here.
Yeah. It really comes down to it for me, like exactly that. It's like to get that alignment is falling in love with the process.
Yeah.
If you cannot fall in love with the process, you'll never be able to make it to the end and actually feel good about it. Yeah. You know? And it's really, that's what all these pieces that seem like exactly what you're saying. To the outside eye, it might seem like complacency, like, oh, you know what, you don't need to do anything with your life. Just go sit, drink, and watch television for the rest of your life, you know? Yeah. It's all good, but it's very much more about creating alignment. And for me, what it's been about is creating one of the purest forms of motivation that I can have, which is the fact that I really just enjoy doing something so much that I enjoy taking it to another level and practicing and doing this in the process and this piece. And I think that's what this is more about than, just go chill. I love drinking beers and eating cupcakes and watching, Grey's Anatomy. All right, good.
Don't knock that. Yeah. It's about getting really honest about what actually makes this process sustainable. Yeah. And what actually makes sure that people have the energy long term to pursue their dreams and their goals.
Yeah, 100%. Right?
It's that relationship, it's that level of acceptance that they have in here about who they are and the journey, like you say, the process that they're on.
Yeah. Right? It's really about building a stronger relationship with yourself.
Yeah.
This is something I've been talking about this time, is that people are shut at home with themselves for the first time in a long time for a lot of people, or with their family. And they have to actually look themselves in the eye a lot more than what they used to. And I think that's what's driving people crazy more, is they're like, I'm trying to find a way to distract myself and I can't leave this room. It's a lot harder now.
Yeah, oh my God, that's so true.
What I realize is that there's moments, and I know a lot of people have this, where you do a bunch of stuff and then you stop and you look back and you're like, what the heck just happened? Like, why was I acting like an idiot? Like, in front of that person, I was like, what was that about? Like, I've been chasing this around and I've been doing this, and like, you have to realize, like, that is your survival instinct. There's something that has triggered your survival instinct into making you run around and go, after that girl or after that car, or because I wanted this, because, like, it means something to you. I need the love and connection from these people, so I need to chase them around or this or that. And I think that has been the biggest thing I've realized, is that the why sometimes is not logical, it's just survival based. When you feel like it has to happen, and it's just like, you're not even thinking, you're just like, chase, and then you hop on the plane and you look behind you and you're like, shit. I just wasted 3 months chasing this thing around that I don't even care about.
That I don't really care about. Yeah, I think that's so important. And again, you can go into as much or as little detail as you want. But what's an example of you reaching, like, because what you're describing is a threshold. Describe a moment where you reached a threshold, where that moment became really clear to you that you had to then ask that question and reconnect with yourself.
Yeah. That is a good question. That is a really good question. One part was me in general in my life feeling like the things I was doing, I lost motivation for them. Like, I had motivation for the idea and the grandness of it, but when I looked at the actual thing, it didn't fulfill me to know I was moving in that direction. And that's always been the thing I've been the most aware of, is like, is this thing fulfilling me? And the minute it's not, even if I'm trying to force myself to do it, I will always sabotage myself back. Yeah, and I think that's another survival thing as well, is that, like, our brains, once you know that it's not fulfilling you, our brains are like, nah, screw you, we're not going to do this. But then you're still trying to force a point. And then what you end up with is, I don't feel good enough, I don't follow through on anything, or this and that, more because you're not aligned than those things actually, you know what I mean? Like, so I think that's a big part of it for me, was taking that moment and being like, okay, this is not enough. And then I think another bit is just being around people. There's times when you need to be around yourself, and there's also times when you need to be around people. And I was around people, and I noticed how I moved in social groups and how I chased after certain things and whatever the case. And I looked at it and I was like, why do I actually do this? Why am I trying to be friends with this guy at risk to my own beliefs and this and that and that? Like, why am I trying to follow this girl around for this reason or whatever the case?
Yeah.
And I realized I was searching for this idea of love and connection. You know, everyone has to like me, or everyone. It was a very survival-based thing where it was like, you know, after a certain point, if I felt like it was like the thrill of the chase, like I need that feeling of love, connection, this person to be by my side, and then I get to a point where it's like, oh, I'm safe now, and then I turn around and I'm like, you know, and I think that just happened to a point, and I was getting smarter every time. I was learning bit and bit to the point where I realized the big picture. And this is why I go back to also relationships and stuff. Don't be afraid of them, because without all those little relationships that failed or whatever the case, I learned a bit every time to get me to the point where I could then have the realization, be like, you know what? I haven't actually been chasing people I like, whether it's relationship-wise or whether it's friends-wise.
Yeah.
Relationship-wise. You know, I haven't been chasing people I like. I've been chasing people that have been giving me attention. It's a big difference. And that's where people get that idea of like, oh, I feel unwhole without my partner. And I got to a point and I realized I don't want that piece. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what the typical relationship is actually built on, which is very sad, because the idea of the relationship is that you're not doing it actually because you love them, you're doing it because you need them.
Oh, yeah.
Completely different ballgame.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is very hard for people also, because once people have that realization,
Yeah.
to then build, the model of a relationship has now been thrown out the window. What now do you do? If the relationship isn't about being with them all the time, isn't about the fact that you feel unwhole, and you know that's what you've seen on TV, that's what you see here, here, and here.
Yeah.
What is it then about?
So many powerful points in just what you raised. I think, like one of the important ones is you sort of committing, or you being curious about you being whole, right? You being your own person, instead 100%. Of not using other people as a crutch, but sort of
that's exactly what it was.
Seeking them to feel like yourself, or feel like you are worthy or lovable, or something along, insert adjective, right? Speaks to how like self-aware you are, that you knew the difference. You knew the difference between codependency and wholeness, you know, sort of returning to yourself and accepting yourself for who you are.
Yeah. Thank you. And the thing is, it's an ongoing journey as well.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you never reach that. Again, it's that whole arrival thing. Like, there isn't that.
Yeah.
I have developed myself to a point now where I'm excited about the journey of growth for my life. It's that journey that I've really fallen in love with, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
As much as there's confusion along the way and there's pieces that you miss, for me, I think feeling comfortable in your journey. There was a quote I read in Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Yeah.
Oh, are we allowed to swear on this podcast? But there was a quote I read on that, which was, one of the worst things you can do is to know who you are. And that's counterintuitive, because there's a lot of things that like, know your identity, know who you are, but to really feel comfortable, not knowing who you are and being on the journey is the best thing you do. Because the minute you start to give yourself an identity and you start to box yourself in, this is who I am, this is what I do, you know?
Yeah.
And if you can let that go and be comfortable in that space. And I'm not saying I'm there yet. Like, for me, it's a journey as well. Like, sometimes I still reach out trying to find identity, but you can take that time. It really gives you the space to grow at a much faster pace.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I was having a similar conversation about this idea of transformation versus becoming. Right? And you know, like sometimes, like when we talk about transformation, the metaphor of like a butterfly, you know, the cocoon coming out of the butterfly, and then the butterfly spreading its wings and flying away. That's often a metaphor that we use. But what's really curious is that growth process leads to the butterfly becoming itself. It doesn't become another animal. It doesn't become any other thing. And this idea that if you surrender to the process, like, so you're not attached to becoming like a tiger, or if you're not attached to becoming something else, if you surrender to the process of your own becoming, you'll find out that natural course of who you are and what your life is supposed to be.
Yeah,
supposed
100%.
to be. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think also it goes back to also, you know how you were talking before about from what it looks from the outside is that we're just trying to like let it all happen and whatever the case. It's not that as well, you know.
Yeah.
It's very much you're not identifying yourself. You're giving yourself the freedom to grow and learn in whatever way, but you're still going after the things you love, not avoiding that bit. It's just more creating freedom in the other areas of your life to really support you in those endeavors that you actually enjoy.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think part of my way of reconciling this is that, you know, you and I talk about this, like I'm a big student of nature. Like I feel like nature is the first teacher. And if you see the way that movement is created in nature, you have force, you have friction, but then you also have flow, you have attraction. And I think the dominant narrative in this space, call it personal growth or whatever, is this idea of forcing movement, friction, you know, in order to break through and break free and this idea of flowing, of creating you know, attraction and enjoyment and acceptance, it brings the full circle round. Like in terms of that whole process, it comes full circle.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, so it's not just one, it's not the other. It's, you know, that meeting point of both.
It's really 100% right. Like, it's really about finding your flow.
Because we are talking about this dance, we've talked a lot about this like individual journey. So look at another layer, is that there are people who have really inspired all of us along the way, right? Yeah. Like none of us can do this alone. And like you said, be it in the form of conversations, be it in the form of mentorship, I can think back to so many people who've helped me, you know, learn everything that I know. None of this came from a vacuum, right? Yeah. Just to add some other colors to this conversation, who are some of the people that you resonate with?
I built myself on. There's a 10-minute video of Will Smith. Talking. He's brilliant. Like, what can you do? He was my first personal development content. My mum got an email. That was Wednesday, Motivation Monday or something like that. Brilliant. And it was this video, and I loved it so much, and I listened to it over and over again, and I got it down to where like when I'm watching it, I can verbatim hit it point for point, like the way he says it and everything.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you remember?
So I was thinking the what?
Do you remember any parts of it that you?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Go on.
He starts off. I've had a great time with my life, and I want to share it. I love living. I think that's infectious. It's something that you can't fake. Greatness is not this wonderful, esoteric, elusive, godlike feature that only the special among us will ever taste. It's something that truly exists in all of us, and it's very simple. This is what I believe, and I'm willing to die for it. Period. It's that simple. I can go on for 10 minutes, but
I love that. I feel like, you know, all wisdom is contained in that. Yeah. Yeah.
No, he, like, literally, I had already learned a bit up till that point, but that was, like, it was the best summary of stuff I felt like resonated with me the most. You know, that's why I picked up The Alchemist, which is now one of my favorite books, was because of him. He talks about it in that video. He says, you know, The Alchemist, you know, I just believe that we can create whatever we want to create. And stuff like that. And there's another one that's about, you don't set out to build a wall. You don't stop there. You say, I'm going to lay this brick as perfectly as a brick can be laid. And you do that every single day. And soon you have a wall. And that goes back to the same thing we've been talking about, which is, you know, you got to take it step by step. You got to enjoy the process of, you know, laying that brick and doing it the best you can.
Oh yeah. That's
so I built a lot of myself on him. I went even into the Fresh Prince stuff and was able to pick up lines and stuff.
Nice.
That's the real personal development content.
Exactly. Right? Any dance moves from Fresh Prince of Bel-Air?
Not yet, but I will work on it.
Okay, there we go. That's good, right? Something to strive for. I want to talk about some of the principles that you've learned from The Alchemist. And again, it talks about the language of the world, or the soul of the world, and it goes to something deeper. And I think, you know, people who may be watching this, they may know a term called oneness, or they may know some other term that resonates with them.
It was the first true example of content or text for me that had the power and the beauty of every time you saw it, it gave you what you needed based on where you were. As I read it more and more, the things that I originally learned, I would understand. Alright, done. Not obviously, there's never a full understanding, but like I would get to some degree, and then I'd notice, oh, I didn't notice that last time. They went through the desert this way, and they avoid it, but they always end up on track. Huh? I didn't notice that the first time. That's like life. The biggest principle that I love from there is like, I think I love them all, to be honest. But like one of the ones is like, you are being supported, you are being moved in the direction. Like there's this, whatever you want to call it, universe, God, whatever the case is, supporting you in going that direction.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Whether you want to believe it's nature, whether you want to believe whatever it is, like there's too many things that happen around you for you not to be grateful for the things that happen that are supporting you on that journey. Whether it's people even,
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, and I think sometimes, because we live in our own heads and, a lot of life is just spent in our own company, right? In the company of our own thoughts and feelings. It can be very tempting to think that we are alone,
100%.
Yes, we have our friends and we have our families and whatever, but on a deeper existential level, I think sometimes it can feel like we're doing this journey alone, or that life is somehow either working against us or there's a bias towards suffering. And I think yeah.
No, sorry.
No, you go.
It was one of the biggest things also that I realized recently is unique versus you're not unique. I think we're somewhere in the middle. Like, you're not unique. Everything that's happened to you, all the problems, all the feelings you're having, they've happened before. You know what I mean? It's part of the journey.
Yes.
So I think having that knowledge is also powerful, but also knowing that you are unique. Like, what has happened before might not necessarily, like, you can shape this any way you want to.
Yeah.
And I think getting to the point where it doesn't matter if you're unique or not unique. You know what I mean? Why does it matter whether you're unique or not unique? We use this thing to make ourselves feel special or not special for so long.
Yeah.
Why does it actually matter?
Yeah.
And I think once you break free of that and you realize everyone has your problems, but at the same time you have something, and that they work together, you know what I mean? The unity plus the individuality work together more than anything.
100%.
I think there's so much power in that for you to be able to, like, also help you with the way that you use your ego. Because your ego is a great thing as well. It can be used as a tool.
Often these ideas are seen as opposites. Right? Like, we're alone or we're together. Either we're unique or we're not. And the truth is, like, if you open to that complexity and the richness of life, you'll see that it's both. It's both and a few other things. It's like, you are...
100 billion things.
And it's like, you are irrepeatable across time. Like, the universe, for whatever intelligence, thought that you should be here. And without you, it would be incomplete. Right? That bird agrees. It's like, yes. I love that. And yet, you're speaking the same language. You represent a universal consciousness that billions of other people feel along with you.
Definitely.
Both are true.
Yeah. And even if you don't believe in this big consciousness or whatever, like, there's just, even if you want to look at it as a math geek or whatever, like, whichever way you want to look at it, the same thing. Like, there is too many different variations of things that have happened for you to have some unique ass feeling that makes you the one that's in the most trouble in the world. It's just not.
Yeah, absolutely. Even if we look at it from a purely factual point of view, every single word that you've used has been used by others. Every single thought that we've had, we've learned from others. And yet, our unique DNA and like, we're the variable. Everything else, the words, the language, the feelings, the experience, that's all the same. Yeah.
Actually, that's very interesting. Talking about opposites again, like, people feel the need to get the objective, to have it's either good or bad, to have an absolute, as they call it. Why do we need to find absolutes? What does that give us? So a lot of people, it gives them security. It gives them the knowledge of who they are. You know what I mean? I like this more than that. And if you can really shy away from that and realize there's balance, between the good, between the bad, and all that. Like, just in military, I've been reading The Art of War, and they're talking about how if you want to really beat your enemy, you want to make sure they're either really happy or really fucking sad. Like you don't want them in the middle. The middle is where you're able to make decisions that work for you.
Yeah.
I was speaking to a friend yesterday, and he was talking about how he went into this depression because he realized he was getting older and this and that and that. And I said to him, that's actually great. Like you went through that phase, and then also that motivated you into taking care of your body more. But at the same time, you don't need to put yourself through the pain to get that same outcome.
Yeah.
And you can even make better decisions. You know what I mean? You have to take the time to also realize, that bald spot on my head means that I've been growing heaps. You know what I mean? Like that I'm this wise dude, that I'm this amazing guy, because he is this amazing dude. Like I've looked up to him. We've gone through so much together, and that, that's like, I love that bald spot. That means we've been through life, this amount of life together. Like that's what that means to me.
It's really powerful, because I think what you're also speaking to is the role of language and meaning. When we call the thing what it is, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes we look at the language we use and think of it as the truth. When we go either or, we go, that must be the truth. It's either this or it's that.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? And part of this process is to realize that you can just use different words to create a much bigger, much more expansive and richer reality. When different things are true. It's both and.
Yes.
With all this time that we now have, with the distractions that are taken away, what advice or insight would you give to somebody who's navigating that, who's feeling that urgency that they want to create something and do something, but they want to do it for the right reasons?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is I'm actually that person to some degree.
Yeah.
There is, I can see so, like, to me, this is one of the most opportune times that we've had in a long time. The ability to grow a business, to enter industries, all sorts of stuff. Like, whether it's personally or business-wise, to me, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's fertile soil to grow anything you want. Like, if you look at the best businesses in the world, they were grown during depressions, during times like this. I also realized opportunity is always available to those who seek it. And I think realizing that opportunity is always there is the most important part of this. Because I don't want to hop into things just because I feel the urgency that they need to be done now.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I need to, for myself, I want to have my life.
Yeah.
So I think to always remember that opportunity is there, and there's an abundance of opportunity if you look for it. And even if someone does what you're thinking, there's going to be another opportunity, another idea, another thing. So never have the feeling of, lack of scarcity, because that kills creativity and it kills your ability to really create the beauty that you put here to create. Which don't feel pressure because of the time, because of the opportunity now. Feel pressure because of the time, of the idea that you have been given time and you have been putting something off for years, and this is the opportunity to go do it.
Yeah, it's
as
like,
a
let's
personal
get
opportunity,
real.
not an industrial opportunity. You know what I mean? Like the industrial opportunity is always there to go do what you need to do, even if it means coming up with a fresh idea and going for something crazy. Like,
yeah,
it's better that way.
That's beautiful. You and I have this luxury. Like we're quarantined in our homes, and this is definitely not speaking to people who are on the front lines and whose lives are very different.
Yeah.
It's definitely speaking to people who are in similar situations like us, and who also have that privilege of this time to create something new and try something new.
Yeah.
Okay.
But even for the people that aren't, like, I still challenge you to just use the question, why more? Like, just understand yourself more, not for better or worse, not to change things, but just to understand, Understand, I do this because of my immediate, it's a reaction for me, or I do this because I want this, It's not about questioning yourself.
Yeah.
It's about being inquisitive towards yourself. It's a whole different thing. Inquisitive can be fun, can be about, discovery.
Yeah.
While questioning yourself for a lot of people means taking away confidence.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not that side. You know what I mean? It's the sort of being inquisitive, being like, oh, this is going to be cool to understand. Like, oh, didn't notice I did that. You know what I mean?
That's another thing, which is to remind people that we're really a lot stronger than we give ourselves credit for. We're capable of so much. And just, like you said, to use that spirit of inquisitiveness and play to know yourself and what you're capable of, rather than to judge yourself for the things you haven't done yet.
100%.
Yeah. You and I have often had conversations in the past about beauty, but tell me a little bit more about experiencing that beauty in your day-to-day life and what that means.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. Firstly, I truly believe that beauty, every moment has beauty if you look for it. I know sometimes we get to a point where we feel like we can't see the beauty anymore. And I think those are the moments where you really just have to stop and just breathe through a couple of moments and look at what's around you and look what's in your life and be like, okay, this is what's beautiful right now. Feeling beauty and feeling gratitude and feeling that sort of stuff is more of a decision rather than an external event. Beauty and growth, I think, for me at least, they sit together quite heavily.
Yeah.
Like, my favorite moments is seeing something grow, seeing the beauty of someone making a decision that changes their life forever in a good way. Or, you know what I mean? Those, even for me, like, I've done this and I'm growing in this direction, those are the most beautiful moments for me.
Yeah.
If you really want to grow really quickly,
Yeah.
sit down, write a list of 10 things that you know. Like, the higher you grow, the more that you can see. You know what I mean? The higher up the mountain you get, the more of the city and the trees you can see at once.
Like, this may be pretty much saying the exact same thing using different language. It's the idea of on the other side of that fear is that absence of judgment and a moment of acceptance, right? The resistance that you have with the thing, you know, that moment of beauty really is you reaching that place of acceptance and connection with whatever that thing was that you were afraid of. You know, so, you know, before we were talking about like self-love and self-acceptance. So when, you know, this idea of like attacking it isn't so much about being oppositional, but it's more so getting closer to it and letting it fade away because you're one with it and you're connecting with what it is.
A lot of people, like, their life, they don't grow as quickly, or they don't, like, different things happen because they're trying so hard. They're focused so much more on avoiding pain than it is actually about living their life. And then they end up living their life running from everything. Because they're trying to avoid that moment with themselves where they're going to be, where they know their brain's going to self-confront them.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Oh, I'm going to watch TV, oh, I'm not going to sleep, I'm going to have music on all night, and then I'm going to fall asleep with the music on. You know, just so you don't have that moment of silence when your brain's like, oh, so what were you doing with your life again?
Yeah.
Didn't think so. Yeah. You know what I mean?
And this question is a little bit inspired by the color of your wall, which is orange. And there's a part of you that also really loves, you know, different facets of creativity. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about how creativity can help us find out more about who we are.
You are never going to be able to explore the extent of your creativity if you're not prepared to start new things.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are scared to start new things because of the fact that they have to start from ground zero. They've spent their whole life trying to be something, and then they have to start playing the guitar and have to basically be this random sod that basically doesn't even know how to string one chord again. You know what I mean?
Like, sod. Yeah.
When it comes to creativity, there's a couple of things. That's one of them, I think, is to just explore things that really interest you the most.
Yeah.
Even if it means starting from ground zero. You know what I mean? Because, like, there's so many entrepreneurs and amazing people and professionals in sports and all these sorts of things that pick up hobbies because they know that them opening those areas also opens parts of their minds that can help them in even the main goal that if you can take, even if it's just an hour a week, you know what I mean, to explore a new hobby or something new that can sort of challenge your creativity in a different way.
Yeah.
So important.
Yeah.
The other thing for me is, and it's something I've been encouraging people to do in general, is that, like, take some time and look at, like, if you could do the biggest, craziest stuff, like, what would it be?
Yeah.
In whatever it was. To really expand your creativity that way, because the thing that I notice about businesses, and this is why it's always good in businesses to bring new people on board, is that you plateau. That's it. To really be like, okay, but if none of these rules existed, if none of this happened, like, how would I play this sport? Or, like, what would be the cool stuff? How would I innovate this and do this and do this?
Yeah.
And if you look at, like, the greatest minds in the world, like Steve Jobs and people like him that have created these companies, the thing that they have been the best at is when normal people would plateau and be like, okay, let's maintain it now.
Yeah.
They are like, no, let's go. Like, if you would even think crazier, like, if you would innovate even further, what would that be? It's not necessarily about them themselves having the idea. It's been always about them pushing into that innovation, creative space that breaks boundaries in that industry.
That's fantastic.
Which Branson, the same thing. Like, he pushed into airline, he did this, you know, even with airlines, he allowed himself to go so crazy with the idea that, you know, he didn't even pay for his planes when he first got them.
Yeah.
he made Boeing basically give them to him to some degree, you know what I mean? So it's just that level of creativity.
Yeah, because sometimes creativity gets not a bad rap, but it can be seen as like a soft skill or something that's less important than strategy. Creativity helps you become more strategic. It actually helps you imagine new things and take you in new directions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's they actually work together so important, like your ability to be strategic. Strategic is like the key to making the creative part work.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about the artist and then the manager leader. Like that's those two people that sort of work together to make the result happen.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, at this present moment, there's so many innovations happening, and especially in the areas of IT with AI and stuff like that, that if you are completely strategic based, without any ability to, you know, be creative or at least take someone else's creation and turn it into something, if it's just strategic for the sake of strategic sake, you will eventually lose your job. People are scared of being too fearful. People are scared of this and that. And, you know, like if me playing Fallout means I have to be a dickhead for 5 minutes to learn more about myself to then go and be a nice guy again, like, I'm down.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I prefer to play at full pace and go to those extremes and learn and then find my balance than to be tiptoeing around my whole life trying to avoid these things that I view as bad of myself. Because I know I'm always going to find home. And that the whole journey is made for me so I can learn stuff. So why not go after it?
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Because life is too short sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that's moving because what you're talking about is also about where it comes from. You know, so the intention isn't to be a jerk or to project or to make life painful for other people. It's the idea that you're a human being, this openness to putting ourselves in new territories and testing new thresholds and new learnings so that we can really find out who we are and what we're here to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
I love that.
That's exactly it.
Yeah. And you've
Beautiful.
done, I love it.
Mm.
Let's say if we're having this conversation a few years down the road, what do you see for yourself? What are some of the things you've experienced?
There is a list I can give you. Of things that I have said before.
Okay.
But at the same time, right now for me,
I
don't know. You know, I've always known, but I've taken a moment now to not know because I think, I just think it gives me the open and creative space again to sort of pick what I want to do and what I want to do and whatever the case. And I think as much as having goals is great, I think not knowing to some extent for at least a little bit can really work to your advantage to open that up again. And again, as much as I could give you a list, I would still tell you I don't actually know. There's small things I could tell you, like I do want at one point want to learn how to fly in martial arts, and you know, there's stuff like that. I can give you small things that I want to do over that period, and things when it comes to relationships and different things like that. Like for me, it's not something that I have full control over when I meet that person. And for me, trying to dictate that I'm going to meet.
This is what will happen, okay? Yeah.
I can control what I want. And I can control the things that I want in a person and whatever the case. But you know, when that person comes around is going to be when I've grown to the point that I need to grow.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I suppose a better way to like reframe that question, because it's not so much like a milestone. It's more about like some of the things you want to experience.
One of the biggest things I've been working on recently, because I go back to that whole thing where I was talking about like find your identity in goals.
Yeah.
I think for me right now it's about me being okay with not necessarily having a full identity and not having to link my identity to something and then just going out and doing the things I want. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing, is finding my center to where I can do the stuff I love without needing the things that I love.
Yes. Yeah. I love that.
And I think that's going to be the biggest thing, because I think that's the thing that confuses the most. Especially, this is the thing that confuses me the most, is like, you're battling against, do I love this or do I feel like I need this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it's a very fine line between like passion and addiction. You know what I mean? Like there's a battle between those two, and I think that's sort of the battle that for me is that I want to come from a place of I really enjoy this stuff. Yeah. I know, like I love coming up with crazy business ideas, doing this, and this, and this.
Yeah.
But I'm just digging down on that whole like, what is my groundwork going to be? for the next century or whatever the case.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like this brings our conversation full circle because we are ending where we began, right?
Yes.
Coming from a place of enjoyment and passion and being really committed to knowing who you are and why you want to do the things that you do. And I think so much of what you shared is just golden for people who are going through a similar journey or who are embarking on a similar journey. And I just think that the next few years are going to be so rich for you in terms of just who you become, you know, as well as the things you experience. So thank you so much for being here and sharing all your...
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you like a socially distant hug from a camera.
You bringing this up and getting me to do this and all this sort of stuff has been amazing for me because it's gotten me back in the thought of like creating content and stuff like that, and just even going through this now was so amazing because there's all these different bits of content that I had put together that just, this was like from 20 years ago. Well, not 20 years ago, because that would be one. But you know what I mean? Like, I thought about this a while ago and it all sort of came together and I was like, I actually do have a decent amount of stuff that I enjoy talking about. So it's made me sort of think about that again. So thank you.
You're so welcome.
It was very informative for myself.
You're welcome. You're full of wisdom. I wanted people to know about it. And
thank you.
Unintended consequence was that you know now even more. You know of your own wisdom even more.
I'm amazing.
You're amazing. All right, darling. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Like the double end.
We did it!
Maybe not today, sometime. We have to sing. What the heck? Bro?
Yeah, next thing is duet, then maybe another podcast.
What would you like? Do you want me to take my hat off?
No, you can be however you want to be.
LL Cool J, here we come.
Ready?
Go for it. Alright. No, I'm gonna put the hat back on. Look at this mess.
No, it looks great.
Well.
You have hair.
Well.
Do you know how many people
I have hair. Except for this bit. Can you see how it's like having a little adventure of its own?
It looks
like,
great. It's just traveling. It just read The Alchemist and it wants to do its own thing.
It's like, I have a vision for my life.